So this is a blackout message, and I tell you every time that it's a blackout message, it will not be long. But I wanted to correct some things that I said when I was laying on my recovery bed. Well, when I was in the hospital, I talked about um the raven feeding Elijah, and I made a statement that the raven um that God may have anointed the raven to be able to, you know, feed Elijah. But that was not correct. Another thing I'm gonna say, when I say right, I kept saying right in that message. Right wasn't for the other person to agree. Right was saying that I approve what I'm saying. It was I need to stop doing it, but because if someone on the other end listened to it, you would assume that I'm trying to get a person to agree with me, and that's not a motive of mine. Okay, that's another thing I wanted to clear up. So the raven was not anointed. God commanded the raven. In KJV, it said the raven was commanded to feed Elijah, and then NIV said he was directed. So he was not anointed. The raven was an unclean bird under the law. The bird was not a covenant qualified vessel. But I think God choosing the bird was deliberate. Um, and through that, God showed his governmental authority. Why do I say that? Because I want to say it revealed to us that God is not bound by categories, um, religion, cultural expectation. God wanted to protect his assignment, and he decided to use something that was seemingly to be unqualified, unlikely, and unacceptable to sustain Elijah while he was in Cherith. Okay, I believe that the raven was a a marker, because the raven and Elijah was in the same land, but not under the same conditions. And provision follow obedience, not environment. Um, I talked about Goshen, and this is the same pattern we see in Goshen. It's the same pattern we see in Philippi, with the Philippians. Another thing I wanted to say was, oh, Elijah. So how can we look at Elijah's being taken up by the whirlwind at this time? How can we look at that? I talked about my life being a prophetic. And I'm, that's just the the reality that I'm like actually living in. Everything has a appointed time, because when you have a mantle that rests on your life, you are an assignment. It's just not, it's just not gifts God give you. He bestow a mantle upon you because there's a particular assignment in this earth that God wants you to fulfill. So Elijah is one of the one of the two prophets that was taken up by a whirlwind. The other prophet was Enoch, and Elijah was the second one. And so, how can I look at that? How can I look at that? Look at that concerning my life. How can I consider that concerning my life? Elijah didn't experience death, and Elijah had a governmental assignment. So, how I consider that is that some assignments are are so governmental that death cannot interrupt them. Death cannot interrupt them. And I've literally experienced that. I've experienced that. Like with the experience of having a fibroid, having hemoglobin levels in a critical state. And God preserved me. He sustained me. Um and even I talked about how my nurse was trying to reach out to me, get me the day I was at work, and she didn't reach me. I didn't give her a call back. And so the next day, the doctor reached me through um someone else, but she reached me, and there was great efforts made, to get my attention so I can go do what I needed to do. So some assignments are so crucial that death cannot interrupt them. So Elijah was a prophetic sign. We see Elijah name in the Old Testament and New Testament. He was one of the few prophets named that was in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so um Elijah was a sign of divine preservation, unbroken continuity, God's sovereignty, and he was a sign of this unstoppable nature of a true calling. Why I say that? Because the Bible declares that said, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That's in Malachi 4 and 5. And so it wasn't saying that it was a reincarnate of Elijah, but it was making an implication that of his spirit. But Elijah um was a reformer. He was a restorer. Um he was a covenant repairer. And so yeah, his spirit, the mantle that was on him, still extend into the new covenant. Until next time.